Hey, happy Wednesday, everybody. Welcome to another edition of NBA Breakdown. Got just a few days left in the NBA regular season. Kind of excited to get into the playoffs, honestly. Look at the playing games next week. And then next Friday, I'm going to have a couple other people join me to talk through the first round playoff series, try to get a read on what some good plays might be in those. So, looking forward to the content as we get through this last week where it gets harder, in some ways, harder and harder to cap things just because fewer and fewer teams have anything left to play for. And so you're guessing about whether they're going to play anybody, what kind of effort is going to show up. But honestly, yesterday was a good example of how that just doesn't always matter. So Minnesota still had an opportunity. And I focus on Minnesota because I like Minnesota, but I think it's a good example of why a team having something to play for doesn't necessarily translate into a great effort. They're playing the Washington Wizards, who have absolutely nothing to play for. The Wizards have been up and down. They haven't been terrible every game, but they're certainly not a strong team. And Minnesota still had an opportunity to get out of the play-in, a very outside chance of winning the division even. Yeah, they were long shots, but the chance was still there. And they went out and just laid an absolute egg. They had been playing a little bit better defensively lately, but just played absolutely no defense against Washington. I was watching the game, and it was rough, man. I mean, just guys cutting to the basket, getting open dunks, wide open shots, real tough. Minnesota shot poorly. They could have had a better offensive game, but all that to say, they didn't come out with a strong playoff type effort. And so even in these games where you would expect teams to come out and have a great effort, it just doesn't always translate. So it's something I'm going to continue to talk about these last few days, but it's not something to count on. And so with that said, we have a little bit smaller slate today. I think there are a few spots that are at least attractive, but, take everything I say with a grain of salt. Yesterday I ended up about 1 unit, but I had, I think, 12 bets. So really just, could have been a better day. I got in on Atlanta and Charlotte at the last minute at plus money and paid for those. Could have been a better day if I just stayed away. Stuck with my original reads, but these are the things that we do. If I had won those bets, I'd be coming on saying, thank goodness I got on Atlanta and Charlotte at the last minute. So, all right. Hopefully yesterday was a good day for you. Let's jump into today's slate and see what we've got. This is NBA Breakdown for Wednesday, April 6th. First up, we've got the Mavs at the Pistons. Dallas up to down to -8.5 now, 220 total. So this was at -9. I think it was even up to -10 in some places last night and this morning. The total was a little bit higher. I think that was up to 224. So both of those numbers have dropped some, and I think for good reason. On Detroit's side, Bagley and Joseph are going to be out again for Detroit today. Not a huge change there. They've been sitting people here and there. And honestly, Detroit's another team to watch. As we get closer to tip, it's possible that they sit other people. The Mavs theoretically still have something to play for here. They could still get to the number 3 seed. They're only 1 game behind Golden State right now. And so that's certainly a possibility. It's unlikely that they'd fall down to number 4. They're 2 games up on Utah, or down to number 5. Let me check that quick. I obviously wrote this down a little bit wrong. Unlikely they drop to 5, which obviously I'd think they would want to stay away from, but they're 2 games up on Utah at this point. So that's not likely going to happen. Dallas has been playing all right here lately, especially in their last few games. So they had scored 110 or less in 6 out of the last 10, but in the last 5 specifically, they've scored more. They had 1 game that was at 103, so it contributed to those 6 that were under 110, but the other games were 114 or better. 2 of those were 120 or better. So the offense has been looking up in the very near term. They've been getting a little bit better shooting lately, so that certainly helps the cause. Their defense has been really mediocre for a team that relied on their defense through so much of the season and had phenomenal defensive numbers. And maybe they'll dial that back in again as they get to the playoffs. It doesn't mean they're not a good defensive team, but recently it's just been blech. 112, 110, then a 135 thrown in there. 100, but then 116. So they really are giving up around that 110 mark a lot of the time. Not as dialed in defensively as they were. And this has been especially true on the road lately. So their offensive rating decent at 112.9 over their last 14, but 118.8 their defensive rating in the last 14 on the road. And it is worth noting that that's skewed by 2 games specifically. They gave up 135 to Washington and 129 to Charlotte. But it's worth saying they gave up 135 to Washington and 129 to Charlotte. I mean, a good dialed in defensive team shouldn't do that. Yes, Washington's had some good offensive games, and it's not shocking when it comes against a team that's not very good defensively like Minnesota. But for Dallas to give up 135 to Washington, 129 to Charlotte, that's pretty poor. So I think that just more contributes for me to this idea that their defense hasn't been all that dialed in. Now, if they come out and decide to put on the best defensive effort they possibly can, they definitely could hold teams down, but it hasn't been what's going on lately. On the Detroit side, 12 straight games now. Actually, I'm going to get to that in a minute in terms of this specific spread. But in terms of how they've been playing offensively, defensively, Detroit scored 115 or more in 5 out of their last 10 games. This is a team that throughout the course of the season has been incredibly offensively challenged. But here recently, it's been a little better. They've only been under 105 points in 3 out of their last 10, which for Detroit is not that bad. Now, they have allowed 115 or more in 4 out of their last 10, but they've been good defensively more often than bad. They've held teams under 105 in 5 out of their last 10 games, so half the time. Overall, they've played slower, lower scoring games at home in their last 14. The pace at home has been 97.57, where on the road it's been 99.64, so almost to 100. Their offensive rating is 5 points lower at 109.5 at home, but their defensive rating is 6 points lower at 108.1. So it's pretty much a wash in terms of home and road. The big takeaway there is that the games tend to be lower scoring rather than higher scoring. Now, what about this spread in particular? It's 8.5 now. It was 9 when I got in on this earlier. Yeah, giving away what you can guess what I'm going to do here, probably all of you. But Dallas has won only 5 games by 9 or more since the All-Star break. That's a 20-game sample size. Detroit's played 21 games since the All-Star break, and they've only lost 2 games by 9 or more. So Detroit's just not losing by this much. They're playing a lot of close games. For 12 straight games, Detroit hasn't lost by 9 or more, and the one before that where they did, they lost by exactly 9 to Boston, which is no shame in that, really. So Detroit's just been playing good basketball, and they haven't had anything to play for quite a while. If anything, they should have been tanking here for the last few weeks or more, but they haven't been. I mean, even when they lose, they come out and put up a good fight. And I see the same thing happening in this game. Again, I don't want to play too much into the motivation. Like I said with that example of Minnesota at the beginning, I just don't think it's worth overplaying that. Detroit's been playing well. Dallas has been up and down, more iffy than Detroit, to be honest. Detroit's been more consistent over the last couple weeks. So I line this game at 106, 105 Detroit. I think it is a relatively close game. I can see it certainly being higher scoring than that. And some of this is just my breakdown. So I do look at trends and stuff as well. Let me pull this up real quick because I think the trends definitely lean toward the over. Yeah, both in-season trends and head-to-head matchup trends both were to the over. Public and sharp money both on the over. It's early in the morning. That can change, but that's where those things are now. So I don't feel nearly as confident in terms of the total there because all those other things point to the over. That's if anything, I'd actually consider the over because of all those other signals. But just in terms of the breakdown of how these teams have been playing recently, I think there's a great chance of this being a relatively close game. And so I got in on the Pistons +9. I actually think I put a half unit on the Pistons money line even. I think this is a game they could win, and the money line was +320 or something. That seems worth a shot to me. So that's one of the better spots on the day. From my perspective, both in terms of all the trend stuff I look at, but also just the breakdown itself. Detroit just hasn't been losing by this much. So I think it's a decent spot. Next up, we have the Nets at the Knicks. Brooklyn down to -4.5. I believe this was -7 when it opened, or even 7.5, a 228.5 total. Brooklyn is on a back-to-back, and a couple things that seem big to me here. So trend-wise, Brooklyn's 3-9-1 against the spread on back-to-backs. Really not good. On the other hand, uh, the Knicks have not been good playing at home, especially recently. I'll get into some of the numbers with that, but in some ways, it almost feels like it's a bad spot for the Nets and it's a bad spot for the Knicks. So, what do you do when both teams are kind of in a bad spot? When this line was all the way up at 7 or 7.5, I thought that was potentially a good bet on the Knicks, though their recent track record at home was keeping me off that. Now that the spread's dropped, I'm not quite so sure about that. Right now, the Nets are tied with Atlanta for the 8-9 seed in the East. Charlotte's only one game back. So, and the Cavs are only a game and a half up in terms of the 7 seed. So again, this is a place where the Nets should have some kind of motivation to stay in either the 7 or 8 seed. But they haven't been playing great. And who knows how much that motivation is going to help them. They're only 5-5 in their last 10 games, and their wins really haven't been great. They beat Houston, Detroit, Miami, but that was back when Miami was on that really bad stretch for a few games, playing poorly. Utah, but again, that was when Utah was playing really poorly without Bogdanovich, and Portland. So I wouldn't say any of those 5 wins are especially good in those last 10 games. Their losses, some of them are okay, some of them not so much. They lost to Atlanta, which, Atlanta's okay. They lost to Milwaukee. They lost to Charlotte, Memphis, Dallas. So none of those losses are terrible, but they've lost to basically every good team they've played that's in decent form. And they've beaten the bad teams or decent teams that are in poor form at the time. Struggling with the pronunciation of these words today. Form. All right. Doesn't matter. All right. It doesn't feel like it's any one thing with Brooklyn in terms of the poor performance lately. Their scoring has been okay. They're at 115 or more in 5 out of 10. I do tend to think of this as a high scoring team with Durant and Kyrie, and that was true when Kyrie was only playing halftime. But since he's come back full time, it just hasn't been the case as much. They've had all of their last 10 games 110 points or more. So nothing terrible. It's just they're not blowing people out of the water with their scoring. On the defensive side, they've held teams under 115 in 4 out of 10, but they have given up 120 or more in 4 out of 10 as well. So the defense has been iffy. They've been better on the road in their last 14, but we do have to consider that some of that was when Kyrie was still playing part-time. However, I was surprised to see that their defensive rating on the road in their last 14 has come all the way down to 110.2 now, which is respectable, and it was significantly higher. So it feels like the defense has been better. And their offensive rating is at 123.1 in their last 14 on the road. So, that's a pretty strong combination. 123.1 offensive rating, 110.2 defensive rating. So there is something to say for that. The Knicks on the other side, like I said, just at home, haven't been great. In the last 14 games, offensive rating 111.8 at home. Defensive rating 114.3 at home. And when you compare it with their ratings on the road, which have actually been pretty solid, it's a 14.5-point swing with offensive and defensive rating combined between home and road for the Knicks. So this is a team that is significantly, not just worse, but significantly worse at home over their last 14 games. Now, if you look at the Knicks in terms of how much they've been beaten by or games that they've won, over their last 7 games at home specifically, here's what we've got. They lost by 18 to Cleveland. That was the most recent one. And we know Cleveland is not a very good team right now. So losing by 18 to Cleveland, I think, is a terrible, terrible loss. They lost by 11 to Charlotte. They beat Chicago by 5. Lost by 6 to Atlanta. That's okay. Lost by 15 to Utah. That was like the only game Utah really won in the stretch where they were really bad. So I would say that's another pretty terrible loss. They beat Washington by 3 and they beat Portland by 30. So they had that one game against probably the worst team in the league right now in Portland where they won by a lot. But other than that, it's been very shaky for the Knicks. And that's where I said at the beginning, Knicks haven't played well at home. So what do we do with this game? Well, I mean, just going by the data, recent form, that kind of stuff, I think Brooklyn should be able to put up over 110 points here. I put them at 115 because that's happened the majority of the time, and the Knicks haven't done a good job defensively at home. But Brooklyn hasn't scored like crazy. So I put them at 115, the Knicks at 106. So with this line down to 4.5 now, I think it starts to shift toward there being maybe some value on Brooklyn. The thing that scares me off of that is Brooklyn's poor performance on back-to-backs and poor recent form. In terms of the total, I would have this going under. The Nets are a team that can explode offensively, so I'm probably going to stay away from the total. But I may see if this line continues to trend this way. If we get down to 4, down to 3.5, I very well may look to take a shot on Brooklyn at that point. Next up is the Celtics at the Bulls. Boston up to 7.5. They were 6th this morning, 222.5 total. The scary thing in this game is that Boston, well, it feels like they should have something to play for. They may or may not feel that way themselves. This is a team that's just sat people down at times, and I suppose they want to be healthy going into the postseason. Right now, they're in a 3-way tie for second, 2.5 games back of Miami, so they definitely have a chance to grab that number 2 seed if they can finish the season strong. But Horford, Brown, and Tatum are all listed as probable right now. The fact that they're on the injury report at all is a red flag to me. I mean, why are these guys on there even as probable if they're going to play? I think it's something to watch. Pay attention, see if those guys are going to play or not as we get closer to game time. I mean, they're probable, so it definitely can happen. But I just think it's a little suspicious that they're showing up on the injury report at all. And I know they have sat some recently, and at least Horford specifically probably does have a little bit of injury issue. So it's not like they aren't probable, but just iffy to me. Chicago comes in on a back-to-back. They're 8-7-1 on back-to-backs. The bigger thing is that they're 10-6 to the over on back-to-backs. So Boston, if they do play everyone, they still are scoring really well over their last 10. They've had a dud or two here or there. They had a 98 they put up. Yeah, that's brutal, but still 120 or more in 7 out of their last 10. So the scoring's been there for Boston overall. I mean, this is in sports betting, you have to play this stuff where if in 10 games they're going to score 120 or more, 7 out of 10, I mean, that's a team you want to look to as a team you want to bet. Yes, they're going to lay an egg sometimes, and that's just part of how it goes. But this is a team that's been scoring better more often than not. The defense hasn't been as dominant, but they've still held teams under 105 in 5 out of their last 10. It's just they've allowed over 115 in 2 out of 10, and pretty similar home road for them. The bigger story is on Chicago's side. So, I mean, we can go into the numbers of how they've scored and stuff, but for a while now, the biggest story with Chicago is just that they play terrible against good teams. Chicago is capable of beating some of the bad teams. I'll be honest, I'll take the L on this. I thought this team was going to be better overall. They're just not. Levine may be out again today. I'm not sure if it really matters that much. So Chicago against top teams since the All-Star break. They have 8 games that I would say are against the better teams in the league. And listen, they lost by 21, 18, 28, 27, 15, 6, 13, and 6. They're just getting blown out by good teams. I mean, this is a spot where if Boston plays everyone and they come out with some aggression, ready to play hard with Boston on a back-to-back, this could get ugly for Chicago. Chicago offensively, they've only scored over 110 in 2 out of their last 12 games now. This is a team that just doesn't score the ball, and Boston against bad offenses holds teams under 105. So it's not a positive offensive outlook for Chicago in this game if everyone plays. Chicago allowed 118, 127, and 127 in their last 3 games. They're hemorrhaging defensively right now. They allowed 120 or more in 6 out of their last 12. They do have a better offensive rating at home in their last 14. This is like the only positive thing I can say about Chicago today, 115.1, which is about 7 points better than on the road over their last 14. The defensive rating is about the same at 116. Chicago is 1 game back of Toronto for 5th, but at this point, Chicago is going to stay in that 5th or 6th spot, likely 6th. They're going to stay out of the play-in, and they're hurting right now. So I line this game, and again, I'm doing this assuming the Boston guys are going to play. Keep an eye on it. 120, 107 Boston, and I think that's being generous to Chicago. I think it's very possible that Chicago is held under 105 points here. So I got in at this at Boston -6, but I actually still like this okay at Boston -7.5. In terms of the total, I do like the over here okay, although I would be more tempted to play Boston's team total over, because if Chicago ends up getting held under 105, even down near 100, then that puts the total in more doubt for me. So theoretically, I think it's a good spot for Boston today. Next up, we have the Wizards at the Hawks. Both of these teams come in on back-to-backs, where Washington has been really good on the season, 8-4-1 against the spread, and Atlanta has not been, 5-10 against the spread on back-to-backs. On the other side, though, Washington hasn't been as good away from home recently. They did score 132 versus Minnesota yesterday, which obviously is phenomenal, but I talked about that already at the beginning, and the poor offensive effort that Minnesota put up. It's hard to imagine another team playing as badly and with as little intensity defensively as Minnesota did yesterday. The Hawks aren't a good defensive team, but I think that they should show up and put in a better effort than that. Washington only has 3 of their last 11 away games over 115 points. So they get there sometimes, but just not regularly. And on the other side, they've given up 115 or more in 7 out of their last 11 away games. So Washington is one of these teams where there's a really big swing between home and away. For them, it's a 12-point swing in terms of offensive rating and a 3-point swing in defensive rating. So 15 combined points offensive defensive rating, that they're worse on the road. And so I think it's more likely that they show up after a big game yesterday, big win, big offensive performance, and they regress today. And the effort isn't as good or the outcome isn't as good. On the other side, Atlanta's really been scoring well overall over their last 10 games, 120 more in 6 out of 10. Even better at home, 6 out of the last 8 at home, they're 120 or better. So this is the story here, really big picture. Washington worse on the road, Atlanta better at home in recent form. Atlanta's offensive rating is 3 points better at home, and it's all the way up at 120.3 in their last 14 games. That's really, really good. Defensive rating down to 112.1, which is good for Atlanta, and 6 points better than it's been on the road. So they have a 9-point positive in offensive and defensive rating combined at home. And remember, Washington had whatever it was, 15-point negative. So this is like one of those spots where the specifics of the matchup on this certain day are a big deal. The only thing that scares me here really is that Washington's been good on back-to-backs and Atlanta hasn't. That is the one thing to just throw out there as a negative. I did want to look at the total sum here because to me, this spread is pretty wide. I do think Atlanta gets it done by double digits, and I'm a little tempted, but man, when these spreads get so big and you have a team like Washington that can score at times, it just gets that backdoor cover gets scary for me with the double digit spread. So I was looking at the total, and Washington, their totals in their last 5 away, the first 2 look really good to the over, 246 and 246. But then the 3 before that, the highest total they had was 216. So well below this threshold in 3 out of 5. Atlanta at home, on the other side, they've been hitting this total or close to it most of the time, 237 and 238. But even before that, 231, 229, 225. So Atlanta's been real close to this overall at home lately. I wanted to look up what Atlanta's team total is here because I do think that Atlanta comes out and puts up a lot of points. Their team totals all the way up to 122, and I actually have them lined at 121 for this game. I said 121, 109. So the edges probably aren't. I want to bet something on Atlanta so bad because I think this is a good spot for them. And I may continue to look for what that is. I may even try to do one of those. If I can find somebody out there that I trust who has a really good player prop, maybe that and Atlanta to win or something like that. Because I do think Atlanta gets it done and likely covers the spread, but I'm not confident enough to pull the trigger on that. 2 games left, Thunder at the Jazz. This, I think, was Utah minus 19 when I first saw it kind of middle of the night when I was looking up and just when I was up and just checking where the spreads were at. Stupid, but it's what I was doing. Down to 17.5 now, 219 total. Both of these teams come in on a back-to-back as well. Oklahoma City 7-6. Back-to-back. Utah 4-7-1 on the season. So Utah hasn't been great on back-to-backs, but Oklahoma City isn't the same team they've been all year. It's a little hard to read too much into that. mean, Oklahoma City really is hardly playing anyone who got playing time through most of the season now. When I look at their starting lineups for tonight, Isaiah Roby is the only one who's even had a sniff of a starting lineup or much playing time. Everyone else, I mean, some of these guys have been playing okay, don't get me wrong, but they're just not, it's not anyone who got playing time. And that's why we're seeing the spread as big as it is that Oklahoma City's running a bench unit / G League team out there as their starting unit. But also, Utah hasn't been very good for a couple weeks now. They beat Memphis last night without Brooks and Morant, but even still, Memphis, as we've talked about, is a great team even without those guys. So that was a good win. They had to go to overtime to get it done. But as bad as they've been playing lately, I think that could be a confidence builder for them. That was a solid win. On the Oklahoma City side, they've still scored okay, even with not playing anybody. I mean, they have a 98 from last night, 101, but then 117, 118. So, sometimes they come out and they can score. Their defense has been really up and down, 94 and 96 the last two games. So good defensively there, but they've been all the way up to 136. A lot of games around 110. Not a team that you want to trust too much defensively, I would say. In the last 14, their offensive rating is 4.5 worse on the road, but their defensive rating is 10 better on the road. So, yeah, they play a little bit lower scoring, but so often close games on the road, and their pace has been too slower at 99.85. So still pretty fast, but a little slower on the road. Utah on the other side, so much of their struggles were, number one, without Bogdanovich, who really helps them to space the floor and gives them a significant other offensive threat. And on the road, where they weren't playing as well in general, they've played so much better at home. They scored 110 against Memphis yesterday, but Memphis is a good defensive team, especially without Ja Morant. And before that, they were over 120 in 3 straight, over 120 in 5 out of 7 at home. So Utah is a team that has put up points at home. The defense has been, a little harder to count on. They gave up 125 to Sacramento, one of the last 5 at home, 117 to Milwaukee, but Milwaukee's a good offensive team, and then 110 to Memphis in regulation, not bad. And then the others were a little lower. So the defense has been okay with Sacramento as that outlier. Situationally, Utah's a half game up on Denver for the division and the number 5 seed, so they definitely should come out here and want to win this game. The question is just, can you take them at minus 17.5? I mean, they don't need to win by 18 points. I mean, if they're up by 20 points with 4 minutes left, they could easily put it into cruise control and win by 12. The one other thing here when trying to deal with this spread, sorry, it got lighter outside. Now half my face is whitewashed, but nobody cares about my face anyway. Oklahoma City away games recently, they lost by 3, 6, 5, 12, 2, and 30. So 5 out of 6, they covered this spread pretty easily. Utah's margin of victory at home, 6, 13, 29, 15, lost by 6, 9, and 38. So they covered it 2 of their last 7 games at home. Not great odds. Even when you look at trends and all that kind of stuff, which I know I haven't brought in quite as much here, but I will just say across the board, season trends and matchup trends favor Oklahoma City. Public, sharp money, all again at this time early in the day favor Oklahoma City. So there is a lot that points to Oklahoma City plus 17.5 here. It's just, do you trust a G League team to cover? I haven't put a bet here on this one. I've held off. I don't feel confident. And I lined this game 115, 105 Utah, so I only put it at 10. But again, I see the pathway for the Jazz to blow them out easily. And the total seems close to right to me. So this is a game I probably stay away from completely. Last up we have the Suns at the Clippers. This line is flipped. It was Suns -3. Now it's Clippers -2.5. 226.5 total. I think the reason that this line is probably flipped is even though there's no news at this point of anyone sitting out for Phoenix, Phoenix has very little incentive to play anyone at this point. They've locked up the number 1 seed in the West. Yesterday, they beat the Lakers to secure the record for most regular season wins in Phoenix franchise history. So at this point, it's just going to be management of getting their guys some playing time, but also not wanting to get anyone injured heading into the playoffs. And they will have a week off during the play-in tournament. So it's not like people aren't going to get rest, but I'm sure that they don't want to get anybody injured heading in. I could see Phoenix even doing something here, like playing their starters a decent amount of minutes in the first half and then sitting them down in the second half, sitting down one or two guys, playing the other guys, things like that, where they're managing the load to try to keep some chemistry, but not expose their guys to too much risk. And so I think that's the reason that the line is flipped here. The thing is, on the other side, the Clippers really don't have anything to play for either. I was trying to find where I wrote this down. Yeah, they're locked into the number 8 spot in the West no matter what at this point. So they are in the play-in. And Paul George just came back, so I could definitely see them wanting to continue to work on the chemistry as they head into the play-in tournament. But there's not a ton of incentive for them to really go all out, maybe do the same thing Phoenix does, play their guys, but then, sit people for the fourth quarter or whatever they want to do, sit Paul George down here and there. So this is a game that I am likely to stay away from overall, though it does feel for sure like a letdown spot for the Suns today. I think I even did do a small parlay that had the Clippers money line in it, just because the Clippers feel like the right side for me here. And I don't want to put too much on a parlay, but the reality is the Suns haven't been lighting the world on fire for the last week now. And I think that's probably just them coasting into the playoffs. This is a phenomenal team. They should be the favorites to win the championship at this point, I think, but they really have been coasting. They haven't scored great recently, 96, 114, 107. They scored 121 against the Lakers without LeBron. To me, there's no pride in that. Like, that's fine, but it's not great. Their defense hasn't been so good, giving up 115 or more in 4 out of the last 10. They've been better at home, and they're away tonight. And the Clippers on the other side, they really have, since Paul George came back, even the game he didn't play, have been playing a lot better. Offensively, they've been on a run, 119, 153, which we're not going to read too much into that. That was against Milwaukee, where Milwaukee sat everyone. And I don't remember if Paul George played that game or not, but 118, 121, just saying they've been scoring around that 120 mark, really a lot better than they had been earlier in the year. They have been allowing more points, 115 or more in 6 straight. So a little bit higher scoring games for them in recent history here. But the Clippers also have been a little bit better at home. Not significant, but a little bit. And Phoenix has been a little bit worse on the road. So I see this actually being probably a close game, regardless of who the Suns play and how long they play them. And that's why at -2.5, I got a little more iffy about it. I wish I had gotten them at +3 earlier this morning. If the line stretched out too much, I think you could even consider a play on the Suns. I don't feel great about that. Too much of a letdown spot to think that they're going to for sure keep it close. But I line this as a close game, 118, 116 Clippers. That would have me liking the over in this game as well. I'm still thinking about that one. And like I said, I think I did do a pretty small money line parlay. Let me tell you who I took with that one: Boston, Atlanta, and the Clippers. So that was a way I found to get on Boston and Atlanta, just expecting them to win those games. Really, to me, it's like if I'm going to put money on the Clippers, and shoot, in the NBA, it's like one of these teams that really should win goes down every day. So I'm not saying there's no risk in adding Boston and Atlanta there. There definitely is some risk in adding these two other teams. But I kind of wanted to get in on the Clippers somehow, and that was a way for me to have a little less risk. I just risked a little over half a unit to win one. So I just felt better about that than the straight play on the Clippers for today. That's just the way I decided to go about it. All right. So that's the slate for today. 6 games. Hopefully we can continue just, at least being positive every day, building up toward the playoffs and have a good run through that, finish the NBA season strong and positively. Also going to be looking forward to getting into baseball. I will just say real quick, if you are excited about baseball, hopefully I'm going to have a breakdown type show a few days a week, especially as we transition out of the NBA and I get into capping baseball a little bit more. Have some good people who really know their stuff in baseball who are going to come on with me, I think, on a pretty regular basis. So you'll get that input from people who have been doing this longer than I have and have some great insight. Hopefully going to have a first MLB show for you on Friday afternoon with JJ from the Bet Crushers, who is If you haven't seen his stuff, go check out Bet Crushers and look for the articles on MLB. I mean, it is the most in-depth stuff you're going to find out there. And he does it for free. So shout out to Bet Crushers. Go check out that baseball stuff like today, because opening day is tomorrow. Exciting stuff. All right. Hope everybody has a positive day. Appreciate the comments, retweets, all the regular stuff. You guys are great. Have a good day, and let's go make some money. I'll see you on Twitter.